The rebellion of pure desire. My boyfriend insists on a platonic relationship, believing that physical desire is sinful when I merely kissed him. He sent me for spiritual purification. After successfully completing it, I turned to embracing his rival, causing him to lose control. Chapter 1. The day I graduated from purification class. The auditorium was filled with quiet clapping as I stepped onto the stage, holding my speech with trembling hands. The crowd, made up of students and their families, watched me with polite interest. In the front row, Andy Lee sat stiffly, my boyfriend. No, more like a stranger now. His face was blank, emotionless, like always. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. True love is the meeting of souls. It shouldn't rely on the body or be driven by desire. My words sounded hollow, rehearsed. The words weren't mine, they belonged to this purification class. As my eyes found Andy, my voice faltered. I forced a small smile. But inside, I felt disgust rise. This is all because of you. 3 months ago, we shared our first kiss. It should have been special, but it wasn't. He kissed me, murmuring my name softly. But then, his expression changed. He looked repulsed. God, I can't believe I just did that. He spat, storming to the bathroom. I followed, standing at the door as he scrubbed his lips like they were dirty. Andy, I whispered, my voice trembling, is kissing me that disgusting to you? He didn't answer right away. His reflection in the mirror spoke first, his cold, empty eyes. I've told you before, I'm platonic. I hate things like this. But you kissed me, I said softly, trying not to cry. You should have pushed me away, he snapped, slamming his hand on the sink. Then, with a sweep of his arm, he sent everything flying, his cologne, his toothbrush, and whatever was left of us. That night, I packed my bags. Andy, I want to break up, I said firmly. He barely glanced at me. No need. Yes, there is a need, I insisted. I need a normal relationship, one with love and sex. The last word dropped as a bomb. Andy lost control. Instead of begging me to stay, he sent me here to a purification class. He said it would fix me, cleanse me of my desires. But it only showed the truth. Andy wasn't platonic. He was cruel. Back on stage, I finished my speech. The applause grew, but my stomach twisted as I glanced at Andy. He looked as always cold, distant, unreachable. Images of my mother's funeral, where he didn't show up, and that photo of a woman on his lap flashed in my mind. My body betrayed me. I bent over and vomited on the stage. Gasps echoed through the room, and he shot out of his seat, rushing toward me. Are you okay? His voice was sharp, almost frantic. I wiped my mouth and looked up at him for the first time without fear. I'm free, Andy, I said, my voice steady, free of you. He stared at me, stunned, but I didn't care anymore. This time, I won't stop. The applause echoed around me, but all I could feel was the churning in my stomach. I sat stiffly on the stage, trying to keep myself together. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out in front of everyone. The teacher hurried over and helped me off the podium, her grip steadying me as I stumbled. Are you okay? Andy's voice reached me through the noise. Calm, detached, but I could hear the edge of irritation, not caring. I'm fine, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Just nerves, he frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly, but said nothing. Of course, he wouldn't understand. He never did. Once we were behind the closed door of the teacher's office, the teacher wasted no time. She pulled out a small vial of blue liquid and handed it to me. Drink this, she said. I didn't hesitate. The bitter taste spread across my tongue as I swallowed it quickly. The nausea faded almost instantly, leaving behind a strange, hollow emptiness. The teacher sighed, her expression disappointed. Rosalie, you're usually listen. Why would you think about something like that during your speech? I let out a short, bitter laugh. Miss, I wasn't thinking about anything inappropriate. I was thinking about my boyfriend cheating on me. She shook her head. You know how this works. This isn't just a psychological program. The medication rewires your mind. If you think about intimacy with Andy, it makes you sick. That's how it's designed. I nodded. I knew. I'd fought it at first, but eventually I stopped fighting. I discovered the nausea only came when I thought about Andy. Other men? Nothing. So I focused on finishing the program and leaving. Later, the office door opened. Andy was waiting, his tall frame filling the doorway. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back instinctively. His hand hovered in the air before he let it drop. You've learned well, he said, smiling faintly. Approval dripped from his voice like honey. He took me home after that, locking me in his villa. Guards were stationed around me, watching my every move. He claimed it was for my safety, but I knew better. I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just numbness. Weeks passed before he decided to take me out. In the dimly lit room, I sat next to him, my posture rigid. His friends' laughter and chatter swirled around me, meaningless noise. Then I saw her, Lydia. Her smile was sharp, her eyes piercing. So, you're Rosalie. Andy's told us all about you, Lydia said smoothly. I nodded, sipping my wine without a word. I told Andy about the purification class, she continued, her tone light, almost teasing. Does it really work? Can it truly erase desire? I tightened my grip on the glass. My eyes flicked to Andy. He looked proud, as if Lydia's words validated him. I drained the wine, then placed the glass upside down on a table. My voice was steady, but each word felt like a dagger. Yes, it works. I don't feel anything for Andy anymore. The room fell silent. Annie's smile froze, shattering under the weight of my words. Lydia raised an eyebrow. Her curiosity piqued. I leaned back, feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time, I had spoken the truth. I didn't care about Andy's reaction. I was done pretending. Chapter 3: Breaking Chains, Finding Relief. I stood in the corner of the crowded room, gripping my glass tightly. Andy's voice was nearby, mingling with laughter. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head, but my heart still pounded like a drum. Andy, I called, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. He turned, his confident smile faltering when he saw my face. What is it? He asked, stepping closer. I took a deep breath. We need to talk. I want to break up. The room seemed quiet. Or maybe it was just in my head. Andy frowned, his jaw tightening. What do you mean? He demanded. You heard me, I said firmly. It's over. Lydia, standing nearby, chuckled softly. Not cured yet. She whispered, a smirk playing on her lips. Andy's expression darkened. He grabbed my wrist, pulling me close. His other hand pressed against my waist. My stomach churned violently. The nausea surged from my gut to my throat. Unstoppable, I pushed him away. But it was too late. Vomit spilled between my fingers, splattering onto the carpet. Gasps rippled through the room. Andy froze, his face a mixture of shock and anger. I wiped my hands with a tissue, my movements calm despite the humiliation. Are you satisfied now? I asked, my voice icy. You can't even have normal contact with men, Andy snapped. And you still want to leave me? Yes, I said, my tone unwavering. Absolutely. Andy's eyes burned with frustration, but he didn't stop me as I walked away. His parting words echoed behind me. No one will take you but me, Rosalie. Don't come crawling back. I didn't look back. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, my vision blurring. The lights flickered, and my body felt heavy. Lydia's wine, there was something in it. My heart raced as I heard footsteps behind me. I tried to move quietly, willing myself to stay conscious. Just around the corner, I stumbled into someone's arms. I froze, bracing for the familiar wave of nausea. But it didn't come. Instead, A strange relief washed over me. Rosalie, a deep voice said. Amused, I looked up into Josh's face, his eyes glinting with curiosity. How long are you going to hold on like this? Josh, I whispered, barely able to stand. Josh Winchester, Andy's former friend and now his rival. His hand reached for my forehead, checking my temperature. Lydia played you, he said, frowning. I'll take you back to Andy. No, I said firmly, we broke up, and he can't help me. Josh tilted his head, a playful smile curving his lips. Then what do you want? I hesitated, desperation clawing at my chest. Summoning the last of my strength, I wrapped my arms around his neck. My lips brushed his cheek as I whispered, help me, Josh, please. He tightened his grip on my waist, his voice soft but sharp. You don't even ask if I want to, just if I can. I can't take it anymore, I murmured. Help me, please. Josh's eyes sparkled with intrigue as he held me closer. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of hope. Chapter for breaking the chains of dependency. Josh's bed was soft and warm, wrapping us like a cocoon. My body trembled, overwhelmed by feelings I didn't fully understand. His voice was soft against my ear. Rosalie, are you sure? I couldn't answer. My mind felt foggy, lost in the intensity. Instead, I pointed at the ceiling. If there was a mirror, I'd want to see you. Josh's eyes darkened. He covered my mouth gently with his hand. All right, as you wish. He hesitated, his face redder than mine. Is this your first time? His voice was shaky, unsure. I grabbed his hand, pulling him closer. Don't stop. The night spiraled into something I couldn't control. My body responded with a passion that didn't feel like mine. Again and again, I clung to Josh, unable to stop. By morning, the sunlight streamed through the curtains, and my body ached. Yet I couldn't resist reaching for him again. Only when exhaustion took over did I finally stop. When I woke, I was in a hospital bed. Josh stood beside me, looking worried. His voice was tense as he spoke to the doctor. What's wrong with her? The doctor's voice was calm. She's experiencing severe hormonal imbalances. It's caused by the drugs she's been taking. That explains the hyperactivity and extreme responses. I felt a wave of guilt. The purification class wasn't about love or purity. It was a trap. The drugs made graduates volatile, keeping them tied to the program. I turned to Josh, my voice trembling. Andy never cared about love. He just wanted to control me. Josh's hand clenched the lab report. What's the solution? He demanded. The doctor hesitated, then smiled slightly. She doesn't need medicine. She just needs to release the excess energy. Josh froze. What does that mean? The doctor chuckled. You're her best medicine. I choked on the water I was drinking, coughing hard. Josh's face turned bright red. You're kidding, right? The doctor shrugged. It's the simplest solution. Josh rubbed his temples and sighed. Fine, then prescribe something for me too. He turned to me, his voice softening. Rosalie, we'll figure this out. But once you're better, we'll go our separate ways. I nodded, his words strangely comforting. While waiting for him to get the prescription, I saw Andy in the hallway. His eyes locked on me, dark and angry. He stormed over. Rosalie, are you following me? What do you want? I stepped back, dotting his hand. The brief contact was enough to make me retch. Doubling over, I tried to catch my breath. Andy froze, staring at me, his gaze falling to my collarbone. His face darkened as he noticed the faint marks left by Josh. His fist slammed into the wall. You can't touch a man without getting sick, he shouted, his voice trembling. Who was it, Rosalie, who did this to you? Chapter 5 Breaking Free. Andy's face was red with anger. He stood stiffly, staring at me like I was something broken. Rosalie, are you really going to fall into sin like this? He shouted. I met his eyes, steady and cold. Andy, this is your fault." Before he could respond, I felt an arm pull me close. I stumbled slightly, landing against a warm chest. Josh's arm tightened around my waist. He kissed the back of my hand, his lips curling into a smirk as he looked at Andy. "I guess I'm the sinner here," Josh said casually. "Go ahead, Andy. Call the cops." Andy's fists clenched so tightly I thought his knuckles might burst. His voice trembled with fury. "Why can he touch you?" he yelled. "Why don't you get sick with him?" I leaned into Josh, feeling his steady presence behind me. "Because of you, Andy," I said sharply. "You made me like this. Now, all I feel when you touch me is disgust." "That's not true." Andy's voice cracked. His desperation is obvious. "No one else has ever had this reaction." I laughed bitterly. "Do you think the other women would admit it, Annie? The program is a lie, a perfect lie." He froze, confusion flashing across his face. I continued, my voice cold. "Rich men like you feel safe because you think you found a way to control us. Women like me trade intimacy for trust, and the program, it makes money off people like you." Josh stepped forward, releasing me carefully. "Hold this for me," he said, placing a small bag of medicine in my hands. His tone shifted as he turned to Andy, his eyes dark with anger. "Andy," Josh growled, grabbing his collar, "I knew you were messed up, but I shouldn't have given you that necklace." I felt my stomach tighten. The necklace, memories hit me like a wave. 5 years ago, my mother had handed me her antique necklace, her hands trembling. "Sell this," she said softly. "It might not save me, but it can give you a future." I had stood in the rain for days, trying to sell it outside a wealthy neighborhood. That's when Josh stopped his car. He bought it instantly, telling me to go home. Later, I found out he gave it to Andy, and he used it to find me. "Rosalie," he had said back then, "be with me. I'll send your mother abroad for treatment." I had agreed. At first, Annie was cold, cruel. Then he claimed to love me. Everyone believed him. But his platonic love was a trap. It was never love. It was control. Josh's voice brought me back to the present. "You'll never touch her again," he spat, his voice full of fury. I looked at Josh, then at Andy. My heart felt lighter. For the first time, I felt free. Clutching the bag of medicine, I walked toward the door. I didn't look back. I never would. Chapter 6, Between Two Fires. Josh and Andy fought in the hospital today. Josh threw the first punch. Andy didn't back down, but he stood no chance. The hospital belonged to Josh Rochester's family, and the security guards all took his side. Andy slowly stood up, wiping blood from his mouth. He looked at me, his eyes full of hurt. "Rosalie, come back with me," he pleaded. I stood by Josh, holding a bag in my hand. I shook it slightly, making my decision clear. "No, I have things to do with Josh," I said. Andy's face tightened. "Rosalie, is this your way of getting back at me?" I met his painful gaze. "If it is, you've already succeeded," he said softly. I shook my head. "There's no need for that," I replied, walking away. In the parking lot, I saw Lydia fixing her makeup in a mirror, holding a bouquet of flowers. She looked nervous, like someone about to meet someone important. "Andy's father is hospitalized here, isn't he?" I asked Josh. "How do you know?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Look at her flowers. They're for an elder, and she's too focused on her makeup, probably trying to impress a man." Josh smirked at my analysis. When Lydia saw us in the mirror, she froze. The flowers fell from her hands. I picked them up and handed them back. She stammered, "Rosalie, I didn't know the drinks were spiked. I swear I didn't mean it." She wasn't sorry, just scared of Josh. I pressed the flowers into her hands. "You like Andy. I'll let you have him. Best wishes to you too." My words stung, and Annie stepped out of the elevator just in time to hear. As we drove away, I saw Andy slap Lydia, and she slapped him right back. Honestly, they deserved each other. At home, Josh pulled me close and kissed me hard. Josh, you know we're not talking about. I started. I know, he said, smirking. I sighed. It's just. Your eyes looked so affectionate, Josh chuckled. I look at dogs with affection too. Later, as I blow-dried his hair, Andy called, his voice heavy with regret. Rosalie, I love you. Let's get back together, he said. Josh smiled. She's busy right now, he answered. Andy's cries came through the phone. But I ended the call. This was my life, my choice. Andy had no say anymore. Chapter 7, A Necklace of Secrets. I don't love you, Andy, I said, looking him in the eyes. Back then, when my mom and I were desperate, you helped us. I'll always remember your kindness. But now we're even. He stood silent for a long time. His face was pale. His hands clenched into fists. Double quotes. No, Rosalie, he finally said. We're not even. Your mother's necklace is still with me. My heart stopped for a moment. The necklace. The one my mom had sold when we were at our lowest. You can keep it, I said, forcing calm into my voice. I don't want it back. I'll return it, he insisted. Fine, I replied, then send it through a courier. Deliver it to Josh's villa. No, Andy said firmly, I'll bring it myself. 30 minutes later, Andy was at the villa's door. I didn't go to meet him. I sent Josh instead. Josh returned quickly, holding a velvet box. He handed it to me without a word. I opened it, brushing my fingers against the necklace. Memories of my mother flooded back, her soft voice, her promises that the necklace would support me for a lifetime. Josh, I said, my voice trembling slightly, do you think I have bad taste? How much is this necklace worth? Josh wrapped his arm around my waist. His touch was warm, steady. Your taste isn't great, he said with a smirk. This necklace, on the market, is worth maybe 10,000. 10,000 wouldn't support anyone for a lifetime. Later that night, I looked out the window. Under the streetlight, I saw a lonely figure. Andy was still there, standing in the cold. Josh glanced out, unimpressed. Oh, right? He said he'd wait for you to come down. I forgot to tell you. It's fine, I said softly. It's his freedom to punish himself. A few days later, I went to the hospital. Andy's father Bill was lying in a VIP room, hooked to an oxygen mask. The doctor told me he didn't have much time, 6 months at most. Chapter 8, Twisted Ties. Josh looked at me in shock. You suspect, Andy? This is absurd, he said, his voice low. We'll know the truth with a test, I replied firmly. Josh's expression darkened. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Wait, I called out. This office, it's always empty. He stopped, turned back, and gave me a wry smile. It's my office. I just don't use it much. I nodded and leaned back, perching lightly on the desk. Then we can stay here, I said. Josh froze, staring at me. His hand, resting on the doorknob, slowly slid down. The sharp sound of the lock clicking into place echoed in the room. I have to bite his shoulder hard to control my voice. A week later, the DNA results arrived. I stared at the paper in my hand, my chest tightening with every word. It was true, I was Bill's illegitimate daughter. Andy and I were half-siblings. Suddenly, so many things made sense. The necklace my mother said could support me for a lifetime. Andy's insistence on keeping it. The way my mother had been whisked off to the overseas for treatment without a question. And the 5 years Andy spent playing his cruel games, hiding the truth from me. I imagine Andy's perspective, sitting in his car, staring at the necklace, realizing the girl outside was his sister. Remembering how his mother's life unraveled, her arguments with Bill, her tragic end, his hatred must have consumed him. He wanted revenge, first, by keeping the necklace. Then, by sending my mother away. Finally, by keeping me close, as a pawn. I laughed bitterly, clutching the report. Tears followed. Unstoppable, I thought Andy had helped me. But no, he'd been punishing me all along. At the hospital, Bill noticed the necklace around my neck. His eyes filled with emotion. "Where did you get that?" he asked, trembling. "Do you know a woman named Linda? She was my mother," I said softly. "She's gone now." We did another DNA test. This time, I acknowledged Bill as my father. Andy found me later in a quiet hallway. He locked the door behind us. His eyes red. "Rosalie," he said, his voice hoarse. "You know why I did it now? I wasn't trying to hurt you." "Enough," I snapped. "You're sick." He reached for me, but I didn't flinch. "You know," I said coldly, "you make me want to vomit." His hand froze midair. A tear slipped down his cheek. "I'm sorry, Rosalie." I slapped him hard. Andy's shocked expression twisted into a smile. "You see, it's fine if you hit me. As long as we can still be close, even if you hit me." He laughed, and I realized Annie was beyond saving. Chapter 9: The Inheritance of Chaos. Andy forced me to hit him. He stood there, daring me, pushing me. I couldn't take it anymore. I slapped him across the face. But instead of stopping, he smiled. That smell sent a chill down my spine. I panicked and banged on the door, shouting for help. My cries echoed through the hospital corridor. The security guards burst in, pulling me away from Andy. My father, Billy, saw the chaos and misunderstood. He thought Andy was attacking me. Without hesitation, Bill grabbed the vase from his bedside table and smashed it over Andy's head. Blood streamed down Andy's face, dripping over his eyebrows and down his cheeks. Andy didn't flinch. He calmly wiped the blood with a tissue and tossed it into the trash. "It's fine, Dad," he said, his voice cold and mocking. "When you die, we'll all be one family." Bill's face turned pale with fury, and I thought he might faint right there. After the incident, Josh banned Andy from the hospital. To distract me, he took me to movies, art exhibits, and horse races. "These outings feel like dates," I said one evening under soft streetlights. Josh glanced at me with a small frown on his face. "I don't know what you feel," he said casually, "but I've definitely been dating recently." "I don't want a relationship right now," I replied. "Then think of it as maintenance," he teased. "Even furniture needs proper care." Josh's humor made me laugh, but his words lingered. One day, Bill saw Josh and me together. His old, tired eyes seemed to brighten. "Rosalie, you need to hold onto him," he said. "Marry into the Josh Rochester's family while you can. They're a top-tier family, and Josh is the only heir." I sliced an apple, acting indifferent. "Father, are you happy with your marriage to Andy's mother?" I asked lightly. His face froze. "That's different. A man marries down. A woman marries up." His words disgusted me, but I said nothing. Bill's condition worsened quickly after Andy's outburst. I overheard him speaking to a lawyer, likely changing his will. 2 months later, Bill passed away. At the funeral, the lawyer announced I was the sole heir to his estate. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Andy. He stood in his black coat, a bizarre smile spreading across his face. "Rosalie," he said, his voice soft but sinister, "this is wonderful. Now we're truly one family." I shivered, knowing the chaos wasn't over. Chapter 10: Shadows of Power. Bill's funeral was chaos. Andy's friends came, and someone recognized me. They whispered about my past with Andy. Andy overheard and snapped. He punched the guy, and the fight turned violent. It wasn't until Andy's family arrived that he stopped. His uncle, Max Johnson, stared him down, and Andy backed off. Josh held an umbrella over me as we left. I turned to glance at a stern-looking man standing near the entrance. Josh followed my gaze. "That's Max Johnson, Andy's uncle. He's the one pulling the strings. Without him, Andy wouldn't have any power." I looked at Josh, curious. "Are you stronger than him?" Josh hesitated, then laughed softly. Let's just say, my dad is stronger. We stood under the umbrella, laughing lightly as the rain fell. For a moment, the chaos felt far away. After the funeral, I became a major shareholder in Bill Lee's company. Andy Lee's executive role was revoked. He didn't fight it. Instead, he begged for forgiveness. I just want you to stay with me, Rosalie, he said. I'll do anything. I can learn to be like Josh if that's what you want. Or, his voice cracked, you can do to me what I've done to you. One day, he swallowed an entire bottle of medication meant for mental clarity. He ended up in the hospital, pushing Max to find me. Rosalie, Max Johnson said, his sharp eyes boring into mine. Andy truly loves you. Can't you reconsider? Max was over 40. His presence commanding. I know you're not Josh's girlfriend. You're just convenient bedmate. His words stung, but I kept my composure. You're now the legal representative of Bill Lee's company. He continued coldly. I can ruin you in 15 minutes. You'd spend the rest of your life paying for it. I trust you'll make the right choice, like your father did. I placed a DNA test report in front of him. You'll be disappointed, Max. He stared at it for a long time, then muttered, why? Even if he's not your brother, you still don't like him. No, I replied, because he's never respected me. Max's anger boiled over. He knocked his coffee over, glaring at me. Then his phone rang. It is from Josh's father, Mr. Rochester. Max, is Rosalie with you? Yes, Max said, his voice calm. We're just chatting. She'll be back soon. As Max led me outside, the sea breeze hit me. I staggered slightly and realized the cafe wasn't ordinary. It was built on a massive ship, floating on the ocean. The game wasn't over yet. Chapter 11, Shattered Illusions. Max handed me back to Josh. Josh was very anxious, his hands trembling as he checked me for injuries. Are you okay? He asked, his voice low and urgent. Max, ever calm, patted Josh on the shoulder with a faint smirk. If you're this worried, you might marry her. I'll give you a big present. Then, without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked away. At home, Josh was unusually quiet. He closed the door, turned off the lights, and said nothing. I felt a cool dampness against my back before I realized what was happening. Josh, are you crying? I asked, my voice barely whisper. In the darkness, his voice was muffled and shaky. Yeah, I was scared. I reached for his hand and leaned closer. I kissed him softly. Does this help? He let out a bitter laugh. Are you trying to make me cry harder? Much later, I learned why Josh was so afraid. This wasn't just about me. It was because Andy's mother, Tina, had jumped to her death from that very spot years ago. Andy didn't know the truth. He thought his parents' arguments were about his father's infidelity. But Tina had been hiding her own secrets. She is the one who cheated. Andy is not Bill's biological son. After leaving the hospital, Andy tried to find me again, but Max stopped him. With calculated precision, Max dismantled Andy's life, removing him from Bill's company and taking back everything he had. Andy's fall from grace was swift and absolute. Soon after, Max arranged for Andy to marry Lydia. Lydia, absurdly, sent me a wedding invitation. The next time I saw Andy, he had run away from his own engagement party. He waited outside Josh's home, hiding in the bushes until we returned. His custom suit was torn, his face streaked with tears. Rosalie, I'm not marrying her, he cried, stepping toward me. If it weren't for her, we'd still be together. He babbled on, insisting I loved him. You stayed with me for 5 years. That proves you love me. Andy's desperation was overwhelming, but I remained silent. He had made one fatal mistake. He tested my relationship with Bill, but never his own with me. Subconsciously, He must have known the truth, but couldn't face it. For 5 years, he never trusted me enough to be honest. That was his undoing. Chapter 12, The Confession at Dawn. Andy was taken away by Max's men. They sent him abroad to recover, far from me. On the day of Lydia's engagement, she was left humiliated, abandoned at the altar. She caused a scene, demanding to cancel the marriage, but nothing came of it. 3 months later, Josh took me to the hospital for my follow-up. As we waited, I looked at him. "Josh, do you remember our agreement?" I asked softly. He nodded, his eyes fixed ahead. "I remember. Once you're fully recovered, we'll end this. Whatever we have." The physician arrived with the test results. Before he could speak, Josh interrupted him. "Wait, you're not good enough. Get the chief physician PLS," Josh said bluntly. Confused, the physician left and soon returned with the chief physician. The chief is Josh's dad's friend. He reviewed the report, his face growing serious. "From the results, it may take another 1 or 2 years for a full recovery," he said. Josh leaned forward, placing his hand on the desk. 1 or 2 years? Is that guaranteed?" The chief physician hesitated. "For some patients, it could take 7 or 8 years. Sometimes even longer." I looked at Josh, puzzled. "If I go to another hospital, will they say the same thing?" I asked. The 2 doctors avoided my gaze. Josh coughed. "If you want to go somewhere else, I'll go with you." "And if I go alone?" I pressed. "Then let me know first, so I can, make a call." Not long after, I moved out of Josh's house and returned to work at Bill Lee's company. It was a struggle. Without Annie's presence in company, Max began dismantling it, taking the best assets as repayment for his investments. At the shareholders meeting, Max smiled as he shook my hand. "Good luck," he said. "It's all yours now." He left me a disaster, but I survived. One night, at 4 a.m., I got a message from Josh. "Dear Rosalie, I'm having breakup symptoms. Only you can save me. Can we meet?" When I arrived home, Josh was asleep at my door. He woke as I unlocked it, stepping inside grudgingly. "I've been waiting for you," he said. "What do you want, Josh?" I asked. He looked at me, his voice steady. "I need to tell you something." Josh confessed that he'd noticed me from the start, not because of the necklace, but because of me. If Annie hadn't been there that day, maybe we'd already be together. I frowned. "Josh, were you confessing you love now?" Josh coughed, looking flustered. "I'm saying I love you. So, will you accept me? Can we start over?" Chapter 13, A Necklace, A New Life. 6 months after our engagement, Josh and I got married. Those 5 lost years of my life were finally behind me. I stood beside Josh at the reception, wearing a beautiful gown, holding a glass of wine. We mingled with the elites, exchanging smiles and toasts. I glanced up at Josh. His calm presence made me feel so peaceful. A photographer caught the moment, and the photo went viral online. Everyone saw the love in my eyes, but no one knew the struggles I endured to get here. Once, I stood in the rain for 5 hours, drenched and hopeless. Josh was the only one who stopped for me. But before that, I met Andy. It was a sunny day. I approached a wealthy-looking couple for help. The man seemed interested, but the woman pulled him away. "Andy, roadside scammers are everywhere," she said coldly. That couple was Andy and Lydia. Fate had pushed me toward Annie before, but our paths were never meant to cross. On our engagement night, my phone buzzed. Annie was calling. "Rosalie, congratulations," he said. Josh answered for me. "Andy, she's so tired she fell asleep." Andy paused. Was she happy today? Josh's voice turned sharp. "Who wouldn't be happy on their engagement? Well, except for you." Half asleep, I hugged Josh's arm. "I'm happy," I whispered. He kissed my forehead gently. his warmth reassuring me. Later, Andy returned to marry Lydia. I had hoped he would stay out of my life, but tragedy followed him. The day before their wedding, Andy's car crashed into a guardrail. Lydia, in the passenger seat, was severely injured. It was revealed they had fought, and the argument turned physical, causing the accident. Andy faced a jail sentence, but Max intervened, presenting years of Andy's mental health records. The trial lasted for years, with Lydia attending in a wheelchair, seething with hatred. The court declared Andy legally insane. Now, Andy doesn't even remember me. He only fixates on the necklace. Max came to Josh and me, pleading, "Name your price, I need that necklace." I gave it to him, trading it for Max's business support. A year later, Josh and I had a daughter, Ruby. Holding his hand, I looked at our little family. "We're all good," Josh said, his voice steady. I smiled, knowing he was right. Our new life had just begun.